ready to dive into the art of war.
Always ready for some Sun Tzu.
You know, it's amazing how this ancient text is still so relevant, even today.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. It's over 2,500 years old, and people are still using it to learn about strategy and leadership.
It's crazy. And for this deep dive, we're using a classic 1910 English translation to really get into the nitty-gritty.
That's a good one. It captures the essence of Sun Tzu's teachings.
So I guess the big question is, can a book about war really teach us anything about succeeding in today's world? I mean, it's not like we're out there on a battlefield, right?
Well, not literally, maybe. But think about all the different kinds of battles we face in our lives, right? Whether it's in our careers, relationships, or even just trying to achieve our personal goals.
Well, I see what you mean, like that competition for a promotion or even just trying to convince my kids to eat their vegetables.
Exactly. It's all about strategy, about understanding your opponent and knowing how to position yourself for success. And that's where Sun Tzu's wisdom comes in.
Sun Tzu doesn't mess around. He comes right out and says, the art of war is of vital importance to the state. It is a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or to ruin. Whoa, that's intense. He's not pulling any punches.
No, he's not. He gets straight to the point. War, or any kind of conflict, is serious business. And to be successful, you need to understand the fundamentals.
Okay, so what are those fundamentals?
Well, Sun Tzu outlines 5 constant factors that influence every conflict: moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, and method and discipline.
Okay, moral law. That sounds pretty heavy. Is Sun Tzu saying you need to be a saint to win a war?
Not quite. What he's talking about is the importance of unity and trust between the people and their leader.
So, like, if everyone believes in the cause and trusts their leadership, they'll be more willing to fight for victory.
Right. It's about having a shared purpose and a strong sense of camaraderie. That's what gives you the moral advantage.
Okay, I get it. Moral law is about the strength of your team and their belief in the mission. So what about heaven and earth? Does it get all mystical now?
Not mystical, more like, well, think about the environmental factors, like the weather, the time of day, or even the seasons.
Oh, right, like how fighting uphill in a blizzard would be a terrible idea. Or like how a surprise attack might work better under the cover of darkness.
Exactly. Sun Tzu knew that these things could have a huge impact on the outcome of a battle.
So heaven is about recognizing the opportunities and challenges that nature throws at you. Got it. And what about earth?
That's all about the physical terrain, like distances, dangerous areas, open ground versus, those narrow passes.
So understanding the lay of the land and using it to your advantage. Like a general might choose a spot for his army where mountains and rivers protect them.
You got it. Or think about it in a business sense. A CEO might analyze their market before launching a new product.
So Earth is all about understanding the environment, whether it's a literal battlefield or a metaphorical one. Okay, so we've got moral law, heaven, and earth. What about the last two, the commander and method and discipline?
These are more about leadership and organization. A good commander needs more than just bravery, right? Sun Tzu talks about wisdom, sincerity, benevolence, courage, and strictness.
So it's not about being the toughest person, but about having a well-rounded set of skills. It's about being smart, compassionate, brave, and knowing how to command respect.
Right. And method and discipline is about having clear lines of command, efficient logistics, and a good system for controlling resources.
Got it. Like the saying, an army marches on its stomach. Even with the best strategy, you're nowhere without good organization and logistics.
Exactly. Sun Tzu understood that an organized force is much more effective.
Interesting. So it's not just about charging into battle, it's about all these other factors working together.
Right. Sun Tzu even gave us a framework for figuring out if you're likely to win a conflict.
Oh, tell me more about this. What kind of framework are we talking about?
He lists 7 things to consider when you're trying to figure out if you'll win or lose. It's like a checklist for sizing up your own side and your opponents.
Okay, I'm all ears. What's on this checklist?
First, who has the moral advantage? Then, who has the better leader? Who has the upper hand when it comes to heaven and earth? Which side is more disciplined? Which army is stronger? Which side has better trained officers and men? And finally, which army is more consistent with rewards and punishments?
Wow, that's pretty comprehensive. It's like a strategic risk assessment, something you could use in any competitive situation.
It really is. And by looking at those 7 things, a leader can get a pretty good idea of what the outcome might be.
So it's all about assessing the situation, figuring out the strengths and weaknesses of both sides, and using that to make smart decisions. It's like Sun Tzu is saying, before you even think about fighting, figure out what you're fighting for and who you're up against.
Exactly. And that brings us to something else. The Sun Tzu really emphasizes the economic side of war. He even calculated how much it costs to maintain a 100,000-man army.
Oh, wow, I'm curious. What did he come up with? How much did that cost back then?
Well, he said that supporting that many men with chariots, armor, provisions to move them 1,000 li, and all the costs back home, it was 1,000 ounces of silver every single day.
1,000 ounces of silver a day. That's insane.
Yeah.
Most kingdoms probably didn't even earn that much in a year.
Right. It really shows how much of a drain war is on resources. And that's why Sun Tzu stresses getting victories quickly.
Makes sense. The longer a war drags on, the more it costs, right?
Yeah.
Not just in money, but in lives and resources.
Exactly. He said that even the richest state can be drained by a long war, leaving them weak and vulnerable.
I can see the parallels to the business world. A long, drawn-out legal battle or a price war can be devastating to a company.
Exactly. It's like a bleeding wound, draining resources and putting you at a disadvantage.
So how do you avoid those long, drawn-out battles? What did Sun Tzu suggest?
He had this interesting idea called foraging on the enemy. It might sound harsh, but it's about minimizing your losses and using your opponent's resources to your advantage.
So like capturing their supplies and using them to feed your army, that's pretty resourceful.
Right. But Sun Tzu's ultimate goal wasn't about plundering after a bloody battle. He believed the best way to win was to subdue the enemy without fighting at all.
Ah, so outsmarting them, maneuvering them into a position where they're defeated before the battle even starts. That's fascinating.
Exactly. It's the ultimate victory. And that leads us to Sun Tzu's discussion of stratagem, or the art of using deception and cleverness to achieve your goals. He was a big believer in manipulating the enemy and exploiting their weaknesses to win without bloodshed.
And of course, we can't forget his famous quote, "All warfare is based on deception."
Exactly. It's all about creating an illusion, making your opponent believe something that isn't true, and using that to your advantage.
Okay, so like pretending to be weak so they let their guard down?
Yeah.
Or maybe spreading rumors to cause chaos in their ranks?
Exactly. He talks about all sorts of tactics for outmaneuvering your opponent mentally, not just physically.
It's all about playing mind games, right? Making them see what you want them to see, and then striking when they least expect it.
You got it. Now, Sun Tzu also talks about the differences between being on the defensive and being on the offensive.
Right. I remember he uses a pretty vivid image to describe those two approaches.
Yeah, he says that the general who is skilled in defense hides in the most secret recesses of the earth. He who is skilled in attack flashes forth from the topmost heights of heaven. It's a great way to picture it, right?
So the defender is like a hidden fortress, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, while the attacker is bold and aggressive, always on the move.
Precisely. But the art of war is all about being adaptable, about knowing when to defend and when to attack, and never being afraid to change your approach.
It's like a chess match. You need to know when to attack, when to defend, and when to sacrifice a piece to gain a strategic advantage.
You got it. And that brings us to one of the most important concepts in the art of war, maneuvering.
Maneuvering. So like strategically positioning yourself for advantage.
Exactly. Sun Tzu dedicates an entire chapter to maneuvering, emphasizing how difficult it is to do well and how important it is to turn setbacks into opportunities. He even compares it to water, saying a successful army needs to be as adaptable as water is to its container.
That's a great analogy. In any kind of conflict, whether it's on a battlefield or in the boardroom, you need to be flexible and adjust your plans based on what's happening.
Exactly. But Sun Tzu warns that maneuvering with an undisciplined army is super dangerous.
Right, like if the army isn't well organized and doesn't have strong leadership, things could fall apart quickly.
That's why he stresses the importance of clear communication, strong leadership, and a shared understanding of the mission. It's about making sure everyone is on the same page and working together effectively.
Discipline, communication, and a unified purpose. It's like a recipe for success in anything, not just war. Now, what about psychological warfare and the importance of understanding the terrain? I feel like those two things go hand in hand.
You're right. It's all about using the environment and your opponent's psychology to your advantage.
So this is where the mind games really come into play. It's about breaking your enemy's spirit before the battle even begins.
You got it. Sun Tzu talks about attacking when their morale is low, using surprise to disorient them, and even spreading rumors to sow doubt and fear among their ranks.
It's like understanding the human element of conflict, realizing that battles aren't just won on the battlefield, but in the minds of the people fighting them.
Exactly. And terrain plays a huge role in all of this. Sun Tzu says it's crucial to know the battlefield, figure out where the advantages and disadvantages are, and use that knowledge to your benefit.
So like camping on high ground so the sun is in your enemy's eyes,
Yeah.
or avoiding areas where you could easily be ambushed.
Right. He even talks about paying attention to little details like dust clouds, bird movements, even their campfires to figure out what they're doing.
It's like becoming a master detective, using every clue you can find to predict your opponent's next move. This is all so fascinating.
It is, isn't it? And that brings us to the last piece of the puzzle, which is the role of spies.
Spies. Okay, this is where things get really interesting. What did Sun Tzu have to say about espionage?
He called spies a most important element in war. He said an army can't move or operate effectively without good information.
That makes sense. So what kind of spies did he talk about?
He divided them into 5 classes: local, inward, converted, doomed, and surviving.
Okay, let's break those down. What are local spies?
Those are the ones recruited from the enemy's own people. Citizens, villagers, anyone who knows the area and the enemy's movements.
Ah, so they provide the basic intelligence like the eyes and ears on the ground. What about inward spies?
Those are even more valuable. They're officials in the enemy's government or military who've been turned to your side.
Wow, so they could provide access to secret documents, battle plans, all sorts of sensitive information. Risky, but potentially game-changing. Okay, what about converted spies?
Now, this is where things get really tricky. Converted spies are enemy agents who've been captured and then convinced to work for you.
Whoa, so they're basically double agents, feeding false information back to their old bosses. Talk about a high-stakes game. Okay, what about doomed spies?
Boom spies are kind of like, well, sacrificial pawns. They're given false information and then allowed to be captured by the enemy, spreading misinformation and confusion.
So it's a calculated risk to mess with the enemy's perception. And finally, we have surviving spies.
Right. Those are the ones who manage to infiltrate the enemy's camp, gather information, and get back safely to report their findings.
It's like something out of a spy movie. So Sun Tzu was a big believer in having this whole network of spies operating in the shadows.
Absolutely. He said a wise leader knows that investing in espionage is crucial for winning a war.
It's all about understanding that knowledge is power. Sometimes the most important battles are won not on the battlefield, but in the world of information and intelligence.
Well said.
Wow, we've covered a lot of ground today. From the 5 constant factors to stratagem, maneuverability, psychological warfare, and even espionage. My brain is buzzing.
Me too. And we've only just scratched the surface of the art of war.
I know, right? There's so much more to explore. But I think we need a little break to process everything we've learned so far. We'll be back soon to continue our deep dive, so stick around.
Looking forward to it.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the art of war. We've been talking about all these strategies and tactics, and I'm really starting to see how much of this ancient wisdom still applies today, even outside of a military context.
Oh, absolutely. The art of war is surprisingly relevant to modern life, even though it was written centuries ago.
But I do have to ask, can we really apply these war strategies to our everyday lives? I mean, it's not like we're out there conquering territories or anything.
Right, not literally, maybe. But think about it. We face all sorts of challenges in our lives, right? In our careers, our relationships, even just trying to achieve our personal goals.
True. Like trying to get that promotion at work or even just getting my kids to clean their rooms. It can feel like a battle sometimes.
Exactly. And those are the kinds of situations where Sun Tzu's teachings can be incredibly helpful.
So how do we actually apply these ancient war strategies to modern life? What are some key takeaways we can use?
Well, one of the most important lessons from the art of war is this idea of knowing yourself, knowing your enemy, and knowing the terrain.
Right, that's the classic trifecta. But what does it actually mean in a practical sense? How can we use that in our daily lives?
Okay, let's start with knowing yourself. It's not just about knowing your likes and dislikes. It's about having a deep understanding of your strengths, your weaknesses, your values, and your goals.
So it's about being self-aware, about taking a good hard look at yourself and figuring out what you're good at, where you need to improve, and what you're truly passionate about.
Exactly. You have to understand your own capabilities and limitations before you can make smart decisions. It's like Sun Tzu says, if you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles.
So knowing yourself is like building a strong foundation for making strategic decisions in any area of life. What about knowing your enemy? Does that mean we have to view everyone as an opponent?
Not necessarily. It's more about understanding the people or situations you're dealing with. It's about trying to see things from their perspective, understanding their motivations and their goals.
So, like, if you're going into a negotiation, you need to understand what the other side is looking for, what their strengths and weaknesses are.
Right. It's about gathering information and using it to your advantage.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just apply to people. It could be a competitor in the business world or even just trying to figure out why you keep procrastinating on a project.
Oh, I like that. Knowing your enemy is really about understanding the challenges you're facing, whatever those challenges may be.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about knowing the terrain? We're not just talking about mountains and rivers anymore, right?
Right. In a modern context, terrain refers to the overall context of the situation. It's about understanding the rules of the game, the power dynamics at play, and the potential opportunities and obstacles.
So if you're starting a business, knowing the terrain would mean understanding the market, the competition, the legal and regulatory environment, all of that.
Exactly. It's about understanding the factors that will influence the outcome of your actions.
Like a chess player studying the board before they make a move. They need to know the strengths and weaknesses of each piece and how they can all work together.
You got it. It's about thinking strategically and considering all the angles before you make a move. Now, one of the things that really stands out in The Art of War is Sun Tzu's emphasis on subduing the enemy without fighting.
Right. He considered that the highest form of generalship. But how does that translate to the modern world?
Well, think about it. In today's world, we have so many tools at our disposal that don't involve physical force.
You mean like diplomacy, negotiation, economic sanctions, things like that?
Exactly. Those are all ways to exert pressure, achieve objectives, and even win conflicts without resorting to violence.
It's like using strategy and intelligence to outmaneuver your opponent, rather than trying to overpower them with brute force.
Exactly. It's about finding ways to achieve your goals without necessarily engaging in a head-to-head confrontation. Now, another concept that Sun Tzu talks about is deception, which I know can be a bit controversial.
Yeah, deception can be tricky. How do we balance that with the need to be ethical and honest?
That's a great question. While The Art of War certainly talks about deception as a tactic, I think it's important to remember that Sun Tzu's ultimate goal was to minimize bloodshed and achieve a peaceful resolution.
So it's not about being manipulative or dishonest for personal gain. It's about using strategy and cleverness to achieve a greater good.
Right. And deception can take many forms. It's not always about outright lies. Sometimes it's simply about concealing your true intentions until the right moment, or using misdirection to distract your opponent from your real objective.
Like a magician, right?
Yeah.
We use sleight of hand to create an illusion, to draw your attention away from what they're really doing.
Exactly. And we see this all the time in business, too. Companies use marketing campaigns to shape consumer perceptions. Negotiators use tactics to gain an advantage in a deal. It's all part of the game.
And as long as it's done ethically, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's about using your intelligence and your resources to achieve your goals.
Right. And I think one of the most important takeaways from The Art of War, especially in today's fast-paced world, is the importance of adaptability.
That's so true. Things rarely go exactly according to plan,
Wow.
right? We have to be able to adjust on the fly.
Exactly. Sun Tzu stresses that no plan survives contact with the enemy, and that's true in life too. We have to be flexible, willing to change course, and always ready to adapt to new situations.
It's about embracing the unexpected and seeing change as an opportunity rather than a threat.
Precisely. And that's a valuable lesson we can apply to all areas of our lives.
It's been really eye-opening to explore the art of war in this way.
Me too. It's amazing how much wisdom we can find in this ancient text.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the art of war. We've been really digging into Sun Tzu's strategies, and I'm amazed at how much of it seems applicable even outside of like a military setting. I mean, can you give me some specific examples of how the art of war has been used effectively in the modern world?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
One area where we see Sun Tzu's influence a lot is in the business world. Think about the concept of subduing the enemy without fighting, which, remember, Sun Tzu considered like the highest form of generalship.
Right, achieving victory through strategic maneuvering instead of just brute force.
Exactly. So in the business world, this could mean things like strategic partnerships, mergers and acquisitions, or even like marketing campaigns that really target a competitor's weaknesses.
So instead of getting into like a price war, you find a way to outmaneuver the competition to gain market share without necessarily like going head to head.
You got it. It's like a chess game. You anticipate your opponent's moves and position yourself for victory. And this idea of using indirect tactics of outsmarting your opponent rather than overpowering them, it's become even more relevant in the age of information warfare.
Oh, wow. Okay, so now we're talking about things like cyber attacks, propaganda, disinformation campaigns, that sort of thing.
Exactly. These are the modern battlefields where the art of war principles like deception, psychological manipulation, and exploiting weaknesses are being used all the time.
It's like a digital version of Sun Tzu's tactics,
Yeah.
where hackers and propagandists are the new warriors, and data is the prize they're fighting over.
Think about how companies use data now to target consumers, to influence buying decisions, and to even shape how people view certain brands.
Yeah, it's all about using information strategically to gain an advantage. And it's not just corporations, right? I bet political campaigns use these same tactics to try and sway voters during elections.
Oh, absolutely. Political campaigns are like modern-day battles for hearts and minds. And the principles from the art of war are essential for crafting their strategies, shaping their message, and understanding their audience.
So in a way, Sun Tzu's teachings are more relevant now than ever before. We may not be fighting with swords and shields anymore, but the principles of strategy, psychology, and understanding the terrain, those all still matter in our modern world.
They do. And I think one of the biggest takeaways from the art of war is the idea that conflict is inevitable. It's part of human nature. But how we choose to engage in that conflict, the strategies we use, and the principles we follow those things make a huge difference in the outcome.
It's about being proactive rather than reactive, about thinking ahead and being ready for anything. It's understanding that victory doesn't always come from brute force, but from a mix of intelligence, adaptability, and a deep understanding of both ourselves and the people we're up against.
Sun Tzu reminds us that real strength doesn't come from the size of our army or the sharpness of our swords, but from the clarity of our vision, the strength of our resolve, and our ability to adapt to an ever-changing world.
It's been an awesome journey exploring the art of war and seeing how much it has to offer, even in today's world.
Yeah, I agree. It's been a great deep dive.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.